So you're not going to believe this, but I am still interested in Vanderpump Rules. To feed my interest, I am going to do a deep dives into some of the key players that showed up during the reunion. Tonight, we're talking about Raquel. Now, if you're new here, my name is DavidColarossiPhD. I'm a licensed psychologist, and I would like to say that I have better things to do at night than react to Vanderpump Rules, but here we are. So before we dive in, I think it is important for me to say that it is very irresponsible for a psychologist to go onto YouTube and start saying, hey, this person has X, Y, or Z diagnosis. I have not met with any of the Vanderpump Rules cast, and I am totally unable to really describe their psychological positions. My goal tonight is not to diagnose Raquel. My goal tonight is to talk about or share how I might think about somebody that's presenting the way that Raquel presented during the reunion. Okay, so with all that out of the way, there seems to be three prevailing views about Raquel's mental health. And I disagree with all of them, mostly all of them. The first is that she's a sociopath. People saw her behavior during the reunion, saw that she was pretty stoic, that when the other cast members were crying, she seemed cold and distant and unflappable. And they go, she must not have any emotions. She's ruthless. She's a sociopath. So first of all, the diagnosis wouldn't be sociopath. A psychologist would diagnose antisocial personality disorder. To have a personality disorder, all of them, it represents a pervasive pattern of behavior, meaning whatever behavior we're talking about is going to exist in multiple areas of someone's life for a long period of time. So it's not like she could just show up to the reunion and turn into a sociopath and then turn that off later. If that were the diagnosis, it would be very apparent for a long time. The hallmark of antisocial behavior is cruelty to others, right? People, animals, right? You're harsh, you're manipulative, you are aggressive, and callous and indifferent. There's no regret. So if you look at Raquel's behavior at the reunion, for example, I think people saw her and go, look what she did to Ariana. Why isn't she crying? What she did was harsh. She certainly manipulated the situation, and she doesn't seem outwardly to be emotional. I thought at the end of the third reunion, when you saw her break down and cry, I think it's very clear that she was remorseful there. I thought that everything that she said showed remorse. So for me, she doesn't quite meet that diagnostic criteria. More important to me is the fact that when I say harsh and I'm describing a diagnosis like antisocial personality disorder, I am talking about very harsh. I'm talking about the symptoms of this personality disorder derail somebody's life. Oftentimes they end up in jail. They're often unable to hold down a job. They're often unable to follow rules or guidelines or respect authority. I think if you look at Raquel's life, especially, I think she did beauty pageants. Somebody in that role is having to follow a lot of rules and guidelines. There is a sort of expectation of behavior there. I think there's an expectation of behavior on Vanderpump Rules to be able to film and do all of that, to be able to navigate the social relationships there the way that she has. You have to be able to operate in alignment with certain expectations. That sort of obedience to authority doesn't fit the diagnostic criteria for antisocial personality disorder. So for me, that's a clear no. The second diagnosis that seems to be floating around on the internet is this idea that she has autism, which I think is a miss for a few reasons. So I'm gonna go into the weeds a little bit here, so bear with me. The first thing I think we have to acknowledge is that psychology is a soft science. We don't want to admit it, but it's a soft science. So there is variability in how one clinician over another clinician will approach making a diagnosis. And there is variability in how those clinicians will treat a diagnosis. So there's an inherent flaw there, especially when you are dealing with diagnostic criteria that are not crystal clear. And as it relates to autism, to me, the criteria are anything but clear. They are exceptionally opaque. I think it's the right word. They're not clear. So to give you a little bit of history lesson. In 2013, we moved from the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual 4 text revision to the DSM-5. With that transition, we moved away from having two separate diagnoses, autism and Asperger's, and we moved to a single diagnosis called autism spectrum disorders. So essentially, do you have any of these characteristics that fall somewhere on this continuum? So you can imagine when you're looking at human behavior and you're given the option to score somebody or rate or evaluate somebody on a continuum, there's a lot of variability in how different clinicians will see that. Right? So there's inherent sort of, I think, flaw that can be baked in there. And another challenge that we face as psychologists and therapists is that our diagnoses are very trend-driven. Things become in vogue. In the 70s, there was a book that came out called Sybil, and all of a sudden, everybody's making the diagnosis of multiple personality disorders. Then that sort of goes away, and we're diagnosing borderline personality disorder in the 80s. Then in the 90s, the book comes out, First Person Plural. Dissociative identity disorder becomes really popular. And then in the 2000s, everybody's a narcissist. And right now, this autism spectrum disorder diagnosis is ubiquitous. It feels like it is ubiquitous. The number of people that I've interacted with in the last 3 years that have been given the diagnosis of autism is crazy to me. As adults, autism is a childhood disorder. It is usually diagnosed by the age of 2 or 3. And all of a sudden, there's tons of people that are getting the diagnosis in their 40s. It just, off the top, seems very unlikely. As it relates to Raquel, first of all, the reason why people think that she's autistic is because Rob Dyrdek's wife, Brianna Dyrdek, said that she had been diagnosed with autism. I don't know anything about her, so I can't challenge that. But she said it, and then Raquel went online and said, I can relate. My belief is that Raquel was talking about Brianna's discussion of her childhood as a beauty pageant participant. I don't think that she was acknowledging the diagnosis of autism. But that's how the rumor got going. And then people looked at her behavior during the reunion and said, why is her affect not meeting the mood? She must be autistic. Or why does she not have stronger relationships? She must be autistic. Look, again, there is a spectrum, but if you look at the diagnostic criteria, it is very clear about you only diagnose autism if the symptoms are not better explained by something else. And there are a lot of other things that I think more directly explain the symptoms of somebody being attacked in the public eye and shutting down. The idea that we all of a sudden jump to autism is a wild leap to me. Now, let's go through the diagnostic criteria for autism, and you can ask yourself, does she actually meet the criteria? So the first thing is there has to be significant impairment in how somebody is interacting with people, how they are socializing. And that could be that there is something off about their nonverbals, something is off about their ability to create connection, something is off about their ability to be excited with other people, to match, to have emotional reciprocity. Something has to prevent them from building and maintaining relationships. Now, I know the internet will say she's never had good quality relationships on Vanderpump Rules. But I think you can argue that she had a pretty close connection with Tom Sandoval. I think you can argue that she looks stoic, but I don't think that she has odd nonverbals. I think you could argue that she absolutely shared excitement with Tom and the Toms. Wasn't she buying fangirl shirts, and she was buying the lightning bolt necklace to represent how much he meant to her? There's just too much alignment interpersonally for her to fully meet that criteria. So that's the first one, which I would say not really. And the second diagnostic criteria is that there has to be repetitive patterns of behaviors or interests that are very extreme. And that could be things like physical movements, hand flapping, hair twirling, body contorting, or it could be, ritualized behavior, or interest in things. Like the classical example is people that get, obsessed with model trains, and they like to watch the trains go by over and over and over again. The idea here is that this repetitive movement or this obsession with the object is helping stabilize the individual. It's a self-soothing behavior often. Now, the pushback will be, people will say to me in the comments, yeah, but it's harder to diagnose autism in women because their ritualized behaviors or interests are oftentimes gender conforming. So for example, while a guy might get obsessed with trains and it's odd that he's going to the model train shop every day, it may be less odd that a woman is buying lots of makeup and doing makeup tutorials constantly. But I think the fact that it's possible that her ritualized behavior wouldn't be noticed, the fact that it's a possibility doesn't therefore mean that she has the diagnosis. What we have seen, or what I have seen in the finale and the reunion, there is no evidence to me that her interest in makeup or anything or any kind of ritualized behavior or interest, there is no evidence to me that it is clinically significant. And that is always the question you have to ask yourself. Is what I am seeing, whether it's the relationships or the repetitive behaviors and interests, is it derailing how she functions in the world around her? And if it's not, to me, the diagnosis doesn't fit. And the last diagnosis that's going around is this idea that she has dissociated. I don't think that she meets the diagnostic criteria for a specific dissociative disorder, meaning, a disorder means that it's happening over time frequently. I don't think that it's significant and that she doesn't have separate personalities. I don't think she doesn't know where she is. None of those kinds of things. But the idea that she dissociated during the reunion, that's reasonable, right? It's kind of reasonable. It is reasonable that she, when dissociation happens, oftentimes when you are experiencing a trauma, you psychologically can't handle the distress that's happening around you. And so you sort of lose touch with reality. You depersonalize. You don't know, you sort of separate yourself from you, or you separate yourself from the environment around you from a psychological standpoint, and you sort of lose touch. And when that occurs, you can get that kind of blank look on your face because you're not really connected to what's happening around you. I think that is possible. What I honestly think is much more possible is that you have this woman who had a poor sense of self, wasn't grounded, didn't have a strong identity, was untethered. I'm trying to think of how many different ways I could describe the same thing. And she latched on to the wrong person. I think that Tom, and I'll talk about him more in a separate video, but I think that Tom cast a big shadow. And for some people, that shadow is annoying and frustrating and distressing. I think for her, it felt comfortable. She could just align with him and do whatever Tom is doing and be a support system. And I think she fell in love with the idea of having that kind of a relationship, with that kind of codependent relationship with somebody. And I think that she was, because of that alignment with him, not thinking about the impact she was having on others. And then she went to this reunion and got just annihilated. She's there grieving the loss of her friendships, the loss of her identity in many ways, her sense of self, her reputation in society, her career. I mean, she lost so much in that reunion. I can't imagine her seeing a way out. And I think that led her to just shut down. My guess would be that she was also heavily medicated to get herself through that episode. Now, again, I am not an expert on Raquel. I've never met Raquel. This is just my effort at helping, at least sharing how I would think about making a diagnosis for somebody that presented the way that she did in that reunion. So please let me know what you think in the comments below. The first thing was my decor behind me. She's watching and she goes, "Oh my God, black walls and a brown couch, LOL." Now I see that and I'm thinking, wait a second, I purposely painted that wall black because I had the brown couch. I thought that was in vogue right now. Now, if I was offended, which I'm not, but if I was offended, I would have looked it up. Is there anything wrong with a black wall and a brown couch? And if I did that, which I didn't, I would have found that together, black and brown set a moody, modern aesthetic. The best way to do black and brown is to incorporate mixed materials. Wall and couch. Texture. What's up, good golly? So then she waits 10 minutes and she goes, "Oh, God, David keeps stuttering." Quite the stuttering psychologist. And I wonder if she writes and she's like, "Enter. Got him." I don't know, but I'm hurt, good golly. Okay? This whole video I've been trying to speak more clearly for you. And then at the end, she keeps watching. And then at the end, she goes, interesting that this psychologist used the word narcissistic. Most seem to steer away from this term because of how overused it is. David is so stupid. Well, good golly, you know what I think? I think it's okay. I welcome you back to my video with open arms, and I hope you leave more loving comments. I do want to see a picture of your couch and wall, though. That I want to see.